the Council's website so that the public can observe the meeting without actually needing to be present. So starting on my left, I'd like to invite members and officers to introduce themselves, and if you can please remember to turn your mic off when you've finished. Thank you.
Morning everyone, my name's Councillor Sonia Layton from Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Good morning, I'm Isaac Wilson, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
G'day folks, Hannah Bithell from Kirkstall Ward.
Morning, Keely Parker, Head of Product Management, IDS.
Good morning, Claire Grundy, Interim CDIO, IDS.
Good morning, Tim Rollett, Intelligence and Policy.
Good morning, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Morning, Helen Sorotti, Planning and Sustainable Development.
Morning, Martin Elliott, Head of Strategic Planning for Leeds.
Morning, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Good morning, Angela Barnacle, Director of City Development.
Good morning, Angela Laycock, Head of Audit and Corporate Governance.
Hello, Joanne Cook, Head of PFI.
Good morning, Mike Diskin, PFI Expiry Programme Manager.
Morning everyone, Chris Rowlands, Head of Finance, Corporate Financial Management.
Good morning, Mary Hasnip, Head of Finance in Corporate Financial Management.
Good morning, Tilina Dizoisa, Grant Thornton, Senior Manager, replacing Paminda Sethi.
Good morning, Claire Matson, Head of HR.
Good morning everybody, I'm Andy Dodman, I'm the Assistant Chief Executive for People, Digital and Communications.
Morning everyone, I'm Victoria Bradshaw, I'm the Assistant Chief Exec for Finance, Trades and Resources.
Hello everybody, I'm Kate Taylor, Director of Finance and Commercial Services and Section 73 Officer for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Good morning everyone, I'm Linda Wild, Independent Member.
Good morning everybody, Councillor Conrad Hartbrook, Councillor for Rothwell.
Good morning everybody, Rob Chesterfield here for the Councillor for Middleton Park Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Andrew Carter, Carvely and Farsley Ward.
Good morning everybody, Rebecca Roberts, Legal Advisor to the committee.
Good morning, I'm Debbie Oldham and I'm Clerk for the committee.
Morning everybody, Jonathan Foster, Senior Head of Audit, Corporate Governance and Insurance, and covering the role of Lead Officer today.
I must say, it's such a well-attended meeting. I always tell everybody this is the most important meeting of the council. So much so, we've only 2 spare chairs now, which is really good. We'll fill them at the next meeting. So, Debbie, can you run through item 1 to 6?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there's no appeals. Under agenda item 2, there's no exempt information. Under agenda item 3, there's no formal late items, but there has been some supplementary information in relation to item 7, which is matters arising. And can I just check that everybody received this? That's lovely, thank you. Under agenda item 4, do members have any declarations of interest to declare? I'll take silence as there are none. Under agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Robinson and Councillor Carter is here as his substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Right, so if we move on to agenda item 6, minutes of the previous meeting. So firstly, can we accept these as a correct record? Excellent, thank you very much. Matters arising. So there are some matters arising. There may be more from the floor, but if we can start with you, Jonathan.
Morning everyone, so matters arising today. Start with the internal audit update report. So members had asked for further information, not just around what is in the audit plan, but the thought process behind what we don't include in the audit plan. That information has been circulated to members ahead of the weekend, so that one we consider responded to. Moving on through matters arising, Grant Thornton approval of the 24-25 accounts. As Debbie mentioned, supplementary information has been shared with members around that. There's also a query around assurances around the financial challenges, particularly in the social care areas, adults and children's, and that information is due to come to committee for the June meeting. Financial and Treasury Management Assurances, Councillor Layton requested information around the procure to pay process, and that information is also due to be shared in advance of the June meeting. And then there was a question around the combined authority, the number of grants that the authority receives and sign-off arrangements from the combined authority, and how we deal with that impact. And I'm just going to pass over to Kate from the combined authority to give an update there.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me today to do that. I'll talk a little bit, and very happy to take kind of any questions that might arise out of that. As you'll be aware, we are, I guess, the regional tier of government that sits within there, so a number of funds will flow from central government into the combined authority for the benefit of the region. That money is then distributed amongst either to partners to deliver, which may be local authorities such as yourself, or other partners. For example, Adult Skills will go directly to our college partners in there for it. All of that money is given to us under our local assurance framework that we are required to have by government to be a safe provider. Effectively, it sets out how we will manage that money, how we will make decisions about the best way to spend that, how we will assure government that that money has been well spent, and how we will evaluate. So it is a complete end-to-end process, and every combined authority is required to have one of those. We're also required to review it annually and to send it into CLG for sign-off, CLG being effectively, I guess, our sort of parent government department from a management point of view as combined authorities. So ultimately, we remain the accountable body. I remain the responsible finance officer for any money that flows into the combined authority and then down into partners. And I am required to ensure that we have kind of safe arrangements for distributing that money, and also around ensuring value for money. So I refer to myself as Section 73. I have exactly the same legal requirements as Victoria does as Section 151. It's just a slightly different piece of the legislation that sits in there. So historically, we have relied quite significantly on internal audit grant expenditure sign-off, and we are looking at that at the moment in there. Just for context, I came into the combined authority in May of last year. For that, previous I'd been at West Midlands Combined Authority, so quite an extensive experience of working in the combined authority space with partners in there. What we are looking at the moment is around our protocol with partners and what is a right and proportionate level of assurance to have within there. Particularly with our local authority partners, particularly when it comes to grant expenditure, we are now looking going forward with integrated settlement, which gives us greater devolution and how we can pass that down into our partners as well to ensure that there is efficiency and effectiveness through the system. From a financial perspective, that means that we are looking to effectively take out the requirements for external audit of grants and money that passes down into our local authority partners unless there is an explicit requirement from the funder to do that. Now, where there is a requirement from the funder, I effectively have to do what we call back-to-back effectively of those arrangements to ensure that that passes on. But where we don't, and where I can rely, and particularly for local authorities, you are in the same you're in the same framework as we. You've got your external audit process is exactly the same as ours in terms of that, your value for money assurance, all of the things that you will be doing as a committee around assuring arrangements that are in there for that. That gives me comfort that I can rely on statements from Section 151 officers where applicable to do that. So we are looking to do that around that to hopefully free up. I know there has been a significant amount of resource that has sat within local authority internal audit plans, and that will start to wash through in terms of that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour of what we are doing going forward. Happy to take any questions.
Right, does anybody have any questions? Comprehensive report. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That concludes matters arising unless any further questions around any of the items.
No. Excellent. Well, we'll move now quickly on to agenda item 8, which is update on Planning Advisory Service peer review.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce the report, which provides an update to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee regarding the progress made on the PAS Review Action Plan. And this follows a planning peer review visit we had from the Planning Advisory Service in June of last year. The final report was received in August of last year and reported to Executive Board in September, and we also highlighted the receipt of the report at Corporate Governance and Audit Committee in September of last year as well. The report identified 12 key recommendations, and attached to the covering report this morning is the action plan which sets out progress made against a series of recommendations. These are categorised into high, medium and low priorities, with all recommendations with the intention for those to be completed by mid-26-27 of last year. The reason for that is that we are still awaiting some key parts of government legislation to clarify a number of matters which do impact on the recommendations and how we might take those forward. Progress against each of the recommendations is set out in the action plan, and it's been colour-coded. Just to remind members of the coverage of the topics in terms of the recommendations, these concern matters in relation to service planning, workforce planning, digital planning within the service, budget matters, assurance, as well as planning enforcement and caseload management. But all of the details are covered in the report, Chair. Thank you.
Right, would anybody like to speak to it before we ask for questions? Okay, right. Members, any questions? Sonia. Sorry, Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair. I have got a couple of questions, firstly around AI. And I note there's a lot of pilots happening, not just in Planning Advisory Service, but generally. And I wanted to ask from an audit perspective, is there a single register with all these pilots in? One of the things that's on my mind is it's great that pilots are happening. It's obviously very important to test before you spend a lot of money on a system. You want to make sure it's the right thing. But I would be concerned that we stay in sort of pilot mode and then that just becomes, you know, business as usual and never gets embedded quickly enough into business as usual. So I'm just wondering, from an audit perspective, were there any recommendations around a standard approach to pilots? What expected outcome should be? How quickly you should run through pilots before you then commit to budget? And that was my first question. Shall I just go on to my second? Or
Yeah, should we take that first? Because that's quite an important one.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we embarked initially on a 3-month pilot with a system called Xylo Core, which operated at the end of last year and concluded in December. So we have some kind of early indications of the value of that. Obviously, at that point, we didn't feel that we had all of the information that we needed to be able to take that forward into a formal procurement process. So we're on an extended pilot process now, and we actually have the tooling free to September of this year. So we'll have had it for almost a year, sort of 11 months on in terms of that. We're very cautious, obviously, in the use of AI, and obviously there are more and more players coming into this AI market as well, so we certainly don't want to jump before we're ready, and we certainly don't want to jump until we actually have looked to see what else is out there, even though we're only just working with one provider at the moment. So yeah, we are taking a very cautious approach to this. We've got a larger number of our officers involved in it. It was initially 6 on the first pilot. We've got about 15 now. So we're trying to see if it is scalable, if we can scale up to be able to see that quantum of savings and efficiencies that we'd expect to see. But in terms of do we have a standard approach? We don't in terms of this AI pilot, because it is just so new and it's a very dynamic situation. We're obviously working with corporate governance, information governance, IDS colleagues as well. So we do feel as if we're all over it in terms of the governance and making sure that we've got those assurances in place to make sure that we're using and deploying AI responsibly. And I think kind of our next timescale will be towards the end of having this free tool. But we are working, as I say, very, very closely with IDS all the way through this. So we're definitely not going it alone in that regard.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, if I may just add to that answer as well, just to assure members that we do have a fairly robust AI governance structure across the organisation. So we do have an AI steering group. We also have a responsible AI policy, information governance policies, and an environmental impact policy. So we use that framework across the organisation. So when looking at those in-flight projects, as the example just given, we do have that sort of broader governance framework, so we can assess benefits and also assess next steps. Thank you.
And just for committees, to let committee know, we attend the AI steering group as well, so we have oversight, so we can provide assurance around what's happening in terms of the governance around individual projects through attending that meeting.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear you do have a standard approach to all pilots when it comes to AI. I mean, like everyone, I am concerned about rogue AI, but actually I'm equally concerned about not meeting budget and these things not being rolled out and us not realising the benefits of it. So I hope there's balance in your policies to make sure that delivery is a focus as much as protective sort of policies as well. Is that right? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Can I refer you to page 23, part 20, recommendation 5, strategic budgeting. I'd like a progress report, please, particularly relating to the fact that the vacancy factor is thankfully being reduced from a fairly hefty 6% to 1%. How is progress coming along there? And just a comment, I take it in part 23 there that's just poor budgeting, that we've proposed an income target that wasn't achievable. But that's just a comment rather than asking for an answer. It's fairly obvious, but I'd like a progress report on that, please. Do you want me to continue with other questions, or? Then moving to areas of ongoing work. What's the risk of these other areas not meeting the timescales you've set out? Is there some risk in slippage? Because there are a number, if you look at the PASS implementation action plan, there are a good few there you've achieved your objectives, but there's a good few where you've got timescales for achieving objectives. I would query how realistic they are, and I'd like a comment on that, please.
Right, who'd like to take those?
Thank you for your questions, Councillor Carter. Just to kick off, other colleagues may wish to comment as well. I mean, just on the vacancy factor and recruitment, and just to assure you and the committee, we are very proactive with our recruitment within the service. It's a frontline service in terms of delivering on the council's priorities, and in terms of staffing, we want to make sure that any vacancies are covered as quickly as practicable. We have had some challenge in recruiting to some posts because of their very specialised nature. BNG in particular some time ago, but we have recruited to that post now. We're also working closely with the combined authority to supplement our resources to support corporate projects in relation to mass transit, etc., etc. So we are being proactive in recruitment to enable the service to continue to deliver on the priorities for the council and beyond. In terms of the ongoing work, I mean, it is a broad front in terms of the number of actions covered in the action plan. As you can see, a number of greens, number of ambers, a number of whites. The whites relate to areas that need to be picked up subject to government consultation documents being resolved. There are a number of outstanding ones which are pending. Subject to those been resolved, then they will be fed into the action plan. But we're working hard as a management team within the service to make sure that we're keeping all of the actions on track and moving them forward positively. We're also in contact with the Planning Advisory Service to undertake a return visit, probably in April, so they will be advising us further on next steps if there are any particular issues that they see following that visit. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Just to come back to the vacancy factor, what's it running at now then, in terms of percentage? And also, I take it you were referring to the Planning Advisory Service coming back this April and not April 2027?
It's this April, Councillor Carter. I mean, on the vacancy factor, I would have to double check that with colleagues, but we are working through a series of vacancies and there's a quick turnover in terms of those moving forward.
Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to pick up on, I think it was caseload management, and I think you've implemented some process efficiencies there. And what I wanted to ask is to make sure that you're consistently reducing the time associated with those caseloads. Are you embedding that into a performance management framework so that your team are targeted on making sure that information is put in the caseload management system and is following the process? Thank you.
Sorry, Victoria, you just wanted to come back on the last point.
Yeah, if that's okay, sorry. When we're preparing the budgets, we do look at trends around the vacancy factor, and that would have been appropriate, but we have refined that since in the last couple of years, and to have a look at what the impact would be on the income budgets of not recruitment in advance of somebody leaving, and that's what we've put in place around the planning. What I would say is as well that the income target is very volatile within that service, and there's no trends that you can follow. It changes year on year, and some like this year's been quite good. Last year wasn't as great, and forecasting that is really difficult. But what we have done is revise that target for 6-7, so it's not around poor forecasting. It was around being able to have a more realistic amount that we can achieve on it. So, and we do review these every year as part of the medium-term financial strategy and the budget planning process as we get more and more trend data to be able to use from. Thank you.
And on Councillor Layton's.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to Councillor Layton's question, I think the overall point is that these recommendations will be embedded as business as usual, rather than sort of treated as standalone fixes. And as part of that, in terms of caseload management, we're just about to launch a revamped performance dashboard, which will monitor individual and team performance to make sure that the recommendations in here are embedded within the service moving forward.
Councillor Bithell.
Thank you. And thanks very much for taking the time on the report, folks. I was surprised, I guess, that it was coming here and not to scrutiny. And I also found it quite difficult from an audit perspective to be able to, without the actual PAS document, to see where the potential gaps or non-gaps were. I have this time sort of grouped my questions. Look at that, eh? Gotta love it. So my first section will be on enforcement, and then I'll move on to some other bits. So the digital enforcement triage tool, I think I have a bit of concern around that, given that we already under enforce. It talks about increasing transparency in paragraph 30. And I wonder if there is to be transparency in comms around why that enforcement isn't always done. On para 42, it talks about harm, and I wonder around the harm to the institution of planning, around whether that's included when we look at reasons to or to not enforce. And then I wondered on page 45, on paragraph 45, again on enforcement, I wonder if there's the potential, because we all know the issues with resources, we all know that we have to only enforce on things that there's a real genuine harm, and whilst I believe that harm to the institution of planning is a genuine harm, I don't know until you answer my third question whether or not that's actually engaged with as a concept. I wonder whether there's something we can do around the way that they do speed camera operations, where the purpose is to become predictably unpredictable, which would become possible using the AI. So of the ones that are not acceptable by planning policy, but wouldn't necessarily be conducive to us to enforce on all of them, we pick 3 randomly using AI and enforce on those, in the same way that on 20-mile-an-hour zones, the police will park their van up 3 times at random times so that nobody knows whether they're going to be caught on that road. And it's called becoming predictably unpredictable. And I wonder whether there is some appetite for that to then improve, and that would feed into the other questions on enforcement.
I think it's worth remembering that councillors are very customer focused, we're very customer facing, residents come to us, and often it's when things go wrong, very rarely when things go right. So we have a view taken from our residents on what perhaps doesn't go wrong. So it's quite nice to hear both sides, but some really important points there. So who'd like to take those?
I'm happy to kick off, Chair. Other colleagues may wish to come in as well. I mean, just on your general point, Councillor Bithell, about under-enforcing, I think when we've done benchmarking before, I think we've demonstrated that Leeds as a core city exceeds or is at least on a par with other core cities in terms of breach of condition notices served and stop notices served. So where we can take that action and where it's proportionately necessary, then we do take that action. The measures that have been identified in the report in terms of the actions and the triage tool is about managing the process in terms of being able to deal with cases efficiently and effectively and proportionately. So the purpose of that, and other colleagues can speak to that in a little bit more detail, is just try and improve the back office work as well as the customer service on those matters in terms of acknowledgement letters, etc., etc. In terms of your final point on AI, I mean, clearly, as we're saying this morning, AI in planning is an emerging area. It's a dynamic area. It's an area that's yet to fully mature, and we need a better understanding, I think, of how it might apply in the circumstance that you've described. But certainly, as technology improves, as our efficiencies, move forward and capacity increases, then, we want to embrace digital more fully. We're a service that wants to be a digital service, and the report sets out a number of strands linked to the wider digital progress that we're making. So I don't know if other colleagues want to come back on some of the other points. Thank you.
I'll just jump in terms of the digital triage tool. When we actually get a number of initial reports, quite often they aren't actually planning matters at all. Sometimes there can be civil matters or matter for the police or whatever. So in some ways this will actually kind of deal with those queries at point of contact, so that it stops people having to then write into the council quite often quite lengthy complaints or responses. And the digital triage tool attempts to sort of to sift those ones out and actually then provide a proper signpost for those customers to be able to go to the correct place. There's no point in coming to enforcement, for example, on a civil matter, because then all we will do is say, this is a civil matter, you need to go and do sort of X or Y. So it attempts to kind of to streamline those ones out. Where things are kind of marginal, they will always come through to the officer, and there will always obviously be, the phrase that we use in terms of any AI is always that human in the loop. So there will always be an officer in the loop there making that final decision or final determination whether to accept cases or not. So it won't just be a case of computer says no. It literally will be just a tool that will help. But I think when we came to committee last time, we indicated that a lot of the cases that do come to the enforcement team are not enforcement matters. So it'll just hopefully streamline those out and actually then provide a better service to those customers who do come seeking some answers to be able to be directed to the correct place. This tool already operates in a number of authorities, and I know in one of the authorities I've been speaking to, they've said it's actually cut down on those kind of avoidable contacts by about 40%. So we're hoping to see some kind of real efficiency savings here, which then does obviously allow officers to spend their time on those ones which are having the most harm and most impacting our residents.
If I can just ask a quick question on the back of that, and obviously we've had the points about the workforce and so on. What percentage, and maybe it's not a percentage question, do we have built in where builders themselves self-report that are then turned into complaints?
I don't think many. I mean, I haven't got the stats, but I have to say the vast majority of the reports are made are by members of the public and by members. So all officers out and about, you know, we get lots of reports from other officers in other areas who are out and about amongst the city who see something and report it. But no, that I can't really think of very many that have actually come through from developers or builders themselves.
No, I think you've got it the wrong way around.
Oh,
It's when complaints are made against builders, and our officers allow the builder themselves to self-diagnose, take photographs and send them in. So I think maybe it's a conversation outside this particular meeting. Was it on this point, Councillor Carter, or shall we move on with Councillor Bithell?
A general point, really. Throughout the action plan, the papers, a lot of communication strategy stuff, mainly with staff. It seems to me that there's a natural inbuilt tension, obviously, between elected representatives representing the constituents and professional planning officers. And it just seems to me that sometimes perhaps we're just seeing politicians as a bee nuisance, but we're an elected bee nuisance. That's what we're elected for. And it seems to me that we don't address anywhere in these papers a better interface between planning officers and members planning officers understanding the pressures members are under, and you've addressed it already, Chair, saying how often do we get compliments? Well, not very often. How often do we get complaints? So it's addressing those complaints and how we do it. And I just think throughout this, there's a bigger mission that needs looking at some stage, and that's the interface between members and officers.
Councillor Bithell.
Thank you. I guess, so I have a number of reports that I was just trying to find them actually, because that would have been helpful in this, around enforcement. So perhaps again it would be useful to do that as an offline conversation, because those answers don't necessarily fit with what we're feeding through from other areas. I had some questions on AI, but they have been delightfully answered and asked by Councillor Layton. So moving on, the paragraph 48, it talks about which must be referred to the committee, which planning applications will be referred to planning committees. And I guess I just wanted clarification that there would still be an option for members to refer planning applications into committee, should this be required by them. On paragraph 56, it talks about recommendations on leadership visibility. When I looked at the recommendations in the paper, there weren't any specifically that mentioned leadership visibility. So I just wanted to check that the leadership visibility that's commented on is around the recommendation 1, and there isn't other recommendations that aren't listed in here. In terms of, so often when we get these, and it occurs in the other papers in the document, when we get these assurance reports, we get a list of where it's gone to members. So what scrutiny it's had from members as part of the assurance process. And I don't know where this has gone to members previously, in order to sort of look at the implementation and action plan and things. So it'd be good to hear that. On the appendix on page 32, on 2B, it says see above, and I can't find what I'm meant to be looking at above, but it's on several of them, a see above, see above. So I've clearly missed something. If you could just direct me to that, that would be really helpful. And then I just wanted to compliment on 6B, where it talks about the staff engagement and periodic rotation of roles and functions and patches. It's one of the things that I think strengthens an elected member more than anything else, is changing up what we do and having to be on and across so many different things. And those members that do get across a whole load of different things are much stronger elected members than those that don't. So I'm really, really interested in that idea, and I think it could be something quite magical in terms of what we can then do across council to also skill up our officers. Thank you.
And you don't hear the word magical very often in this room, so David, follow that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your questions, members. Just come back on a couple of them. Other colleagues might want to come in as well. I mean, just on your point to Councillor Carter about the coverage in the report and in the action plan about officer member working. You know, we fully respect that as a service, and we have officer member protocols which set out what those arrangements are. In terms of the report itself and the recommendations that came out of the PAS peer review, that wasn't picked up as a particular issue at the time PAS came in. They didn't identify that as a significant concern through the work that they did. And as a consequence, that hasn't flowed through to a specific recommendation. And in fact, I think there was some positive comments about member officer relations in their findings when they came in last year. So that's how that was sort of dealt with. In terms of your questions, Councillor Bithell, I've been making notes, so forgive me if I've missed anything out. Just on the issue around leadership, that was picked up really through the service planning part of it. One of the things that the PAS review team said last year was that the management team within the service needed more capacity, if you like, to be able to plan the service in terms of service planning, and that's been remedied now. We have some project support to help us do that. In terms of workforce planning and sort of rotating staff, that's something that will be picked up as part of the workforce planning work. I mean, we want to be able to give colleagues across the service opportunity to develop in different teams and to get different experiences. Planning is one of those activities where you need to know a little bit about all of it to know about all of it. So from that point of view, we're keen to enable opportunities across the service to do that. And then in terms of your questions about where this report has been to before, we did an annual assurance report to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee last September, and we set out the direction this was moving in. I think we did report, even though that assurance report was looking back over the previous year, we did describe in that report the fact that the PAS report had been done and that it would be coming back to future meetings of this group. So it was signalled through that process, if that's helpful. Thank you. I don't know if other colleagues want to come back. Jonathan?
I think Councillor Bithell had one question regarding referrals by members to panel. As part of this review and the recommendations within it, there are no proposals to change that as part of the delegation scheme. However, the government is looking at the whole system of committees at local planning authorities, and one of the recommendations through their review is that it's a threshold-based system of referral to panel. So there wouldn't it be based on thresholds of size of applications rather than other factors such as members calling in applications or requesting a call-in. So we wait to see what the outcome of the government's review will be, but at this point in time it appears that doesn't allow for member call-ins, but we, as I say, we still await the outcome of their consultation on that.
And just to come in, build on David's point around the previous assurance report to the Audit Committee and your question around the place for this PAS assurance report versus whether that had gone to scrutiny, for example. Given that the planning assurance review was very much focused on the arrangements that are in place to deliver an effective service rather than, for example, scrutinising in detail specific decisions that had been made or areas of performance, that was the thinking behind the alignment with this committee around the governance and the effectiveness of those arrangements and why that's come here rather than necessarily a scrutiny report.
Councillor Bithell.
Yeah, thank you. And it did say in the papers about, and I think I was actually at the meeting in September, to be fair. So I did know it had come there, but that, if I remember rightly, and I might not, was more about other things and a sort of this will be coming later, as opposed to member scrutiny of the action plan. And the action plan now is currently 50%, which is great that it's 50% of the way to green. That's a real positive. But 50% of the way to green is probably too late for member engagement, really, on something as important as this. So I guess that's a comment, not necessarily for anyone to necessarily answer, but something to mention. Thank you.
Right. I must admit, one of the questions I'd like to ask is there's a part of this report where it talks about the additional resources and the wider organisational support that's going to be needed to tackle some of the more complex issues. And I'm just wondering if you can assure us that you're actually getting the support you need or that it's in train at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are. I mean, the report is broadly based. It cuts across corporate matters as well as planning matters within the service, but we have had practical and very helpful and ongoing support from colleagues in finance, IDS, as well as human resources as well. That support will need to continue in terms of the implementation of the action plan and working through the ambers as they currently stand, and subject to the planning reforms coming through that have been mentioned already, it's likely we'll need further advice from colleagues on those matters as well. In particular, on finance, as part of the government's proposals, they're looking at matters around setting planning fees locally. There are some provisions around that have been subject to earlier consultation, so we will need some advice from finance on what that looks like and some benchmarking perhaps as to how that might apply in Leeds. On IDS, as we've said, it's an emerging area in terms of AI. The government want to see planning authorities increasingly digitised. There's a number of aspects of that work that we're working with colleagues in IDS on. We are working through a process of prioritisation as well, because we accept that IDS have many competing demands across the council as well, but certainly from a planning point of view, we are working with them consistently and clearly on identifying our own priorities to see those through. Thank you.
And that would be, do you want to come in first? Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. It was just to come back to one of Councillor Bithell's earlier points that I didn't think had been addressed, but happy for you to carry on the train of thought.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on that, and we've got representations from IDS here today. Every report we get to this committee, mention of IDS comes because of the transformation of the council and so on, for financial reasons, but also to deliver better customer service and so on. And it just strikes me that I'd like to know and be assured that you feel you have got the capacity to do the work in a timely fashion, or do you feel that the council should potentially put more resources at what is a crucial time for a lot of these programmes that we're doing into the work that IDS do?
Thank you, Councillor Dowson. So yeah, IDS is looking at all the work that we have on the books. So we have our business as usual activities in terms of cyber security, keeping everything safe, and we have resources allocated to that. The other areas we are working with colleagues throughout the council on, primarily through the digital board setup that we have in place with every directorate, is to look at work like this that is coming in and other work that services need to do. and we are starting to get a handle on the work requirements and the resource requirements within IDS, as well as working with colleagues who are looking at delivery of the organisational plan and the 4 big themes in the programmes in the organisational plan. So over this next 2 to 3 months, we are looking at working up what are the resource requirements for IDS, where do we have any skills gaps. The first thing we'll look at is the priorities. So if we are at a point where we have a number of conflicting requirements where they're key priorities for the council, we will discuss that with colleagues at CLT level to help with a prioritisation. If at the end of the day, and this may well be the case, actually there's just too much that needs to be done and it's not a simple case of trying to come up with a batting order, in IDS we will then look at, okay, where do we need to supplement our resources with potential use of contractors or framework arrangements that we have in place with a number of organisations. So we're trying to formulate that plan over the coming, like I say, couple of months to make sure that we are geared up to support colleagues in planning and other areas that are demanding of our time and our resource input.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just to be sort of clear on the separation between this committee's role in terms of looking at the PAS recommendations, how they're then going to be embedded as business as usual in terms of the planning services, service planning and workforce planning. But then there is a clear role for scrutiny in terms of looking at the outcomes and the way that the city benefits from that improvement. And I'm happy to have a conversation with Councillor Bithell about whether maybe through the annual monitoring report that gets considered through scrutiny, there's ways of looking at some of those planning indicators to make links to the work that's gone on here in terms of some of those outcomes for the city. Thank you.
Right, are there any more questions? Anybody, any officers want to comment on anything that's been said? Right, we'll move to the recommendations then. So, does the committee agree with the recommendations as set out in the report? So that's to note the progress made against the past recommendations and delivery of actions to date, as set out in the report, and support and endorse the continued delivery of the actions set out in the action plan at Appendix 1. All in agreement? Excellent. Well, thank you for attending. I know you're really busy. Don't feel you've got to stay. It's riveting what we're speaking about next, but we appreciate you have to have other things potentially to do. So can we move on, please? Sorry. Oh, yes, David, before you go. It's very remiss of me not to actually mention that this is your last meeting with us.
It is, Chair, yeah. I'm retiring from the council at the end of March, so this is my last formal meeting. So thank you for having me.
I've got to say it's been a pleasure to work with you. I know Councillor Carter's been here longer than I have, but I've been here sort of 20 odd years, and you see people come and go, and it's going to be really sad to see you go, because you've been an excellent addition to the team here in Leeds, and you've always tried your very hardest, I know, to actually make sure that Leeds advances and moves forward within the planning field. So thank you for that. Thank you. Right, so with that, off they go, and we're moving on. Councillor Bithell, sorry.
Yeah, I didn't want to say this during the recommendations and things, but just so that we are not accidentally breaking the rules. When it comes to scrutiny, planning decisions aren't covered by planning. It would break scrutiny rules. I don't want us to accidentally be pulled over the coals later on.
Yeah, if I misspoke on that, apologies on that. That wasn't what I was meaning. No, of course.
We'd hate to be in trouble. Right, so agenda item 9, annual assurance report in relation to employment policies and employee conduct.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm really pleased to introduce this item to you. So I'm going to offer you a very quick, brief summary of the paper, and then I'll pass over to my colleague Claire Matson, who will take you through some of the appendix which you have in your pack. So this is our annual assurance report to this committee in relation to employment policies and employee conduct. The focus of this paper is to provide assurance to this committee of the internal control arrangements are appropriately in place for all of our employment policies and procedures, and to ensure that they are up to date, that they are fit for purpose, and well embedded and fairly applied across the organisation. As always, our general approach to these issues is to underpin and to align these policies with the Leeds Ambitions, which was launched last September. More recently, we've aligned to the Council Plan. Obviously, we make sure that it ties in very tightly with our people's strategy. And also, we align with the Values and Behaviours Framework and the Communications and Engagement Framework too. So the appendix in the pack sets out all the details, and just to remind the committee, our reference period here is January 25 to December 25. Much of the content within that has been subject to various different scrutiny board meetings as well. Some of it's also escalated to exec board, just to ensure appropriate democratic oversight. What I'll do now is I will pause and invite Claire just to take you through some of the appendix and some of the highlights in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Morning. So just the document is broken down into a few different areas. So really just to kind of confirm that the processes that are defined and documented. So in terms of policy and guidance, just reconfirming that we're compliant with ACAS and legislation, and along with internal frameworks, just setting out clear expectations in terms of the workforce. Our communication engagement in terms of expectations of the workforce is established through a well-established communications framework that operates throughout the organisation, with regular blogs coming through from the Chief Executive right the way down through Manager Communications. Through the implementation of My People, we've got a real opportunity to be able to direct communications directly to all staff through my self-service. There's more to come on that through the following year. In terms of effectively embedding, we obviously embed through things like appraisals, one-to-ones, new system opportunities through My People, my self-service and my recruitment are giving us real opportunities there as well. And there's work obviously set out in the paper in terms of plans around the EDI work plan and the Be Well at Work framework that is due to be launched in 2026 around supporting staff to be healthy and in work. In terms of monitoring, Andy's already touched on this, but we do obviously go to many different meetings, and we've got internal scrutiny through the internal leadership, scrutiny reports and performance reports that are regularly produced. And just in terms of the overall position for next year, we've got some key areas identified in the report in terms of digital innovation, where we can strengthen existing processes and procedures that are in place, and really advanced plans such as the EDI plan and the Be Well at Work, and really looking at works on our consistency around casework practice across the organisation in terms of supporting managers to do that effectively. So that's a really high-level summary, but open for questions. Thank you.
So we'll move to questions then, members. Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I just wanted to ask, because there was a big focus on sickness and absence from HR perspective. There's a lot of information here. I might have missed it. Was there any data points around sickness and absence and targets? Apologies if I missed it.
We've not included in the report the details of the sickness absence because it's generally covered through like the scrutiny and the performance reports that we can produce. So rather than, this was around reassurances that we've obviously got steps in place. So we can provide you with additional details around attendance management, and I think that is covered off in the performance report as well in terms of the figures.
It does feel a bit odd it's not in here, given it's quite an important part of the strategy for the council to, like reduce sickness and absence, and there's nothing in here around targets. There's lots of other targets and lots of other positive things, but not that.
There's been quite a lot of work happening with the Be Well at Work programme, and we've got resources that have been secured over the next, kind of 2 years really, to try and do some more focus on attendance management. So I know we touched on a mention of that within the report. I know that Lisa Culver, who is our head of health, safety and wellbeing, is leading on that piece of work, and I know she's done some detailed reports to committees previously. So I didn't want to duplicate, but I can provide. I can provide some additions.
Personally, Chair, I think it should be in here.
That's fine. We can make sure we include future.
Thank you. On the appendix, these are all questions for. On define and document D, sorry, E, not D. Apparently letters are escaping me today. It talks about the wide range of materials and access to training to support employees, information to support managers and leaders to be their best, includes the Be Your Best leadership development offer. I guess there's a bit of confusion, I think, for me around the Be Your Best leadership stuff, the EDI stuff that fell within that training programme. We've now got to stage 5 of that training programme, and how that then is what's next sort of thing. Is that then based solely on insight? It talks later in the report about, because I was concerned, obviously Be Your Best was rolled out. Do new managers get the same Be Your Best training? And is that what it talks about later on, where it says the Be Your Best training is done for them, but does that include the EDI? And I got myself a little bit turned around. So if I can just have some input on that before I do the other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Biffle. Yes, so I think you're referring to the mandatory EDI training we delivered as part of that stage approach that you talked about. And that hit about 3,500 managers. So that was done. And that is part of the Be Your Best offer. What we are doing, obviously we're mindful that managers change, so we've got individuals that move into managerial roles, and obviously we're recruiting, and there's the attrition. So we are running that programme as part of Be Your Best to capture incoming and new managers. So we've completed the mandatory, but we're now following it up as part of the ongoing Be Your Best training provision. At the moment, though, the focus is on the other core Be Your Best training programs as well, which are touching on other aspects, but just to assure you, we are still doing the EDI training as well concurrently.
Thank you. On Clearly Communicate A, do our less office-based staff have equal access to insight? And I don't mean now we can do the bring your own device, etc. stuff. I mean practically, do we believe that they have effective enough? And then I guess, where is HR busier? So where are we seeing the most disciplinaries, the most HR issues? And if that isn't, if they don't have as much practical opportunity to use insight, but they have a higher issue with HR-based concerns, what are we doing to kind of square that circle?
Yeah, I'll start that. So at the moment, the focus, as Claire said, is to enable all of our frontline staff to have access to My Self-Service, which, as you know, we launched last year. And we know about 96-97% of staff have accessed it. The issue is encouraging people to continue to use it. And we're also building the functionality of it. It can't cover everything Insight does, but that's work in progress. So if people have access to normal online emails and a council laptop, then they will have access to Insight, and there is more information in that. We're trying to narrow the gap between My Self-Service and Insight as we work through that. Your issue about the correlation with people in process in terms of disciplinaries, grievances and the like. Obviously, we do report on those people in processes in terms of type of role, type of service, type of location. I haven't yet made the assessment as to whether there's a correlation with their access to insight and information, but I can certainly take that away and have a look.
Okay. The moving on to appraisals and one-to-ones, point B, it talks about there's 6% approximately who aren't completing their appraisals, and I don't know whether that's they're not completing them in time or they're not completing them at all. And the concern is less about the appraisal for me, although it's important. It's more about the fact that it's the well-being and development element that isn't then also being included. So how do we know that those 6% aren't on the edge?
So the 6%, Claire will correct me if I'm wrong, some of that percentage may well be individuals who are on long-term absence from the organisation, maternity leave or long-term sickness. But you are right, what we do encourage managers to do, if they can't have the appraisal, to at least have that wellbeing conversation with colleagues to check in if they are absent from the workplace. I think probably it's also not those that necessarily have had no appraisal, but they may also be out of time, because as you know, we have a clear window for appraisal, so they may fall out of the reporting period. So that will include some. So we do emphasise that even though the appraisal is important, the priority is having the conversation to check in and making sure that we are having that regular contact with each member of staff.
Great, that's reassuring, thank you. On Employee Register of Interests, point I, and I forgot actually that Debbie was clerk in this meeting, because my question is, do officers get reminders like councillors? Because these reminders are invaluable, and our reminders come from Debbie. So shout out to you. But without them, I would definitely never be up to date.
Yeah, we do send regular reminders. So in terms of officers that are identified as high risk, you know, kind of potentially due to the role or the type of role that they're in, there's an annual exercise where we would contact those people and ensure that they're reminded to complete the return, and we do chase them down to make sure that we've got a response on those. And then there is a responsibility, obviously, of everybody in the organisation to make sure that they disclose any kind of gifts and hospitality and things like that throughout the year, or if there's a new register of interest that they need to disclose, which is all, again, detailed and insight, and we do put regular reminders in manager comms and things like that to remind officers to make sure that they're completing that. So yeah, we do.
Okay, and I've just got 2 more, Chair, is that okay? Thanks. Well, then I'll take a few more. No. On the, where's the page? Get an electronic notebook, they said. It'll be well effective, they said. The point B of meaningfully monitor, it talks about the fact that the percentage of staff who agree there are opportunities to progress their career has fallen from 54% to 47%. And I guess it's written as though that is necessarily a bad thing. But actually, if we had 100% of people believing that there was the opportunity to progress, we would just be setting up for failure because there aren't that many jobs. So I guess, is that a reasonable question to be asking? Is it more a question of, do people want to progress or not? Do they feel like they could if they wanted to? Do they feel like the CPD is in place to help them to if they want to? It feels like that doesn't quite cover what we want it to necessarily give us the information on. And then on the independent review, H, in review and refine, in fact, it talks about an internal audit carried out in relation to safer recruitment practices across adults and health and children and families. And I guess the question is, have we done this in other services where we know there is a more challenging adherence to HR policy? So those areas where safer recruitment would really, really, really be of benefit to do the audit.
Thank you, Councillor Biffle. So in terms of the staff survey question, we've had a similar conversation with the Scrutiny Board on that very point. And I think it's probably true to say that there is an issue about how that question has been framed, but also how people have interpreted the question. So I think people perhaps have perceived the question to be about progression as in promotion and progressing up the pay grades or to the next bigger job, which is obviously useful for us to understand how people feel about their career plan and their talent pipeline. But I think we've interpreted it as a broader piece in terms of professional development and progression in terms of job flexibility. Yeah, the bigger, broader piece. So I think we may need to review that very specific question next time round, and we have talked to Scrutiny about that. So I would agree with you on that particular issue. In terms of the internal audit about safe recruitment practice, we're just working through the recommendations at the moment of that audit, which particularly did refer to a number of services. I think some of the actions that we want to take forward will apply across all directorates. So we will work through that and then seek where we can apply the learning elsewhere rather than just those services, because it is obviously about a assurance about whether the processes are appropriately understood and followed, and they will apply everywhere, not just in particular areas.
It's a really, really good report, so thank you for that. And we've got 2 more people who want to ask questions, but unless anybody else indicates, I'm going to make those the last 2 so we can actually move forward. So if we start with Councillor Carter, and then Linda, if you'd like to finish. Yeah.
Yes, Chair, thank you. A delicate one, really. Just referring to the define and document section and values and behaviours. Without putting too fine a point on it, are we taking any steps over this next few weeks to advise council employees that they need to ensure they don't push the envelope as regards what could be seen as straying into political activity, for 2 reasons. 1, for their own protection, really, and 2, because it may well have the reverse effect to what they expect. And I would like some assurance that we are ensuring officers understand that we are living in extremely febrile times and care needs taking with what is written and sent out, and we should ensure that this council can't be accused of pushing the envelope too far and interfering with party politics by any political party.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Yes, communications will be shortly going out to the organisation, reminding them of the Code of Conduct, and that will probably go out later today from the Chief Exec.
Linda?
Thank you. So I do have a couple of questions. Is that 3 actually? Shall I do
If you
them
can
all
put all
fairly
3
quickly?
together,
Yeah.
that's great, thank you.
Thank you. So on page 52, item K, there's a reference to managers being required to complete 7 core training courses. I mean, firstly, I think there's so much at stake, isn't there, in a big organisation like this with so many people to get the management and the leadership role right. And I think there's a lot of focus on that, so that's good. But those 7 core training courses throughout 2025 and before July 2026, are you confident that that will be done in time? And maybe not for this meeting, but I'm always interested in, if they're not, what are the consequences if they're not done? So that's part 1. And then part 2 is linked to that. On page 56 in paragraph B, there's a mention of the results of the staff survey regarding the support received from managers being unchanged since the survey in 2023. But I might be missing it, but I can't see whether that's good or bad. Is it? Are you happy that it stayed the same, or were you expecting a change? And as on the back of that, is any further training for managers required? And finally, on page 64, under review and refine, the last item refers to the need to review hybrid working arrangements. And I know we've discussed hybrid working here in the past, but I guess my question is, have you got concerns in that area to make you think that it needs a review? Is Leeds an outlier regarding the number of days colleagues are in the office, and are there any concerns over productivity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So your first question just about the core Be Your Best programmes. We are anxious about being able to ensure that all of our managers attend all of those courses in that reference period you referenced. So there is some anxiety about that. So what we're doing currently is looking at our mode of delivery in terms of can we make it easier for individual colleagues to access the training. We're also likely to extend the reference period too to give people a little bit more time to get to some of the training. So we are also going to add on a few more training courses too. So there's a bit of work still to do on that, and we'll probably do a little bit more communications out to that population to encourage compliance with those core programmes. So a bit more work to do yet on that. You asked a question about the staff survey results. I think our view is that it was a good result 2 years ago, and it was a good result last year. So yes, it didn't change, but some of the metrics did slightly dip down, and that remained relatively solid. And compared to our benchmark, it's stayed pretty positive. So we are pleased with that. I think the trick to that in terms of what the remedy is really keep pushing that management development programme that we just talked about. I think that's probably the key. Final issue you've rightly raised about hybrid working review. I think we're mindful that we did a lot of this during the COVID period, and we very quickly developed our hybrid working principles. Since then, we did do some brief assessment as to how it has landed in different services. We've done some surveying of managers and staff as to has it worked and how we adapt, but not a full-blown review. So we just feel it's prudent now, 4 or 5 years on, to do a more detailed review. So it's really driven by that rather than any sense that it's not worked or it's not working or there's any performance anxiety. I think it's more that it's a few years since we've done the more deep dive into it. So we just feel it's prudent to do it now.
Right, so I think at that point we'll sort of move on. So the first thing I've got to ask you is, does the committee agree with the recommendations as set out in the report? Yep. That's brilliant, thank you very much. So we're now moving on to an agenda item that we specifically asked for. And by way of some background, Leeds has one of the largest portfolios of PFI projects in the country, and they include schools, street lighting, housing, leisure centres, and I think we've even got a waste incinerator that's actually part of the PFI programme. This is a very timely point to actually discuss the process of the hand back to the council of these projects, because it's my understanding that the first one was handled in late 2025. So we've got some experience, and it would be quite nice to understand the positives and the negatives and how we can maybe ensure that process runs smoothly, because I think we've got PFI projects coming back all the way through till about 2041, 13 projects. So if I can hand over, I don't know who's speaking on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Mike Diskin. I am the PFI Expiry Programme Manager working in the Procurement and Commercial Services. And I am presenting the agenda today on delivering expiry for the Council's PFI portfolio alongside my supervisor, Joanne Cook, who is Head of PFI. As you mentioned there, that the report was developed in response to the request of the June 2025 meeting of Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, where clarification was sought concerning 2 areas. Firstly, what risks does PFI expiry present to the Council? And secondly, how the lessons from our first expiry, which you've mentioned there, Cardinal Heenan, which was July of last year, have been embedded into future expiries. Just to provide a little bit of context, thank you, Councillor, for the overview just in terms of the background of some of the projects. For those who aren't aware, PFI is a private finance initiative. It's a form of a long-term public-private partnership that has been used by successive governments from the 1990s through to 2018. These projects are designed to leverage private sector investment in the design, build, operation and ongoing maintenance of key public infrastructure assets such as the ones that you've mentioned there. And to reiterate, Leeds City Council has one of the largest portfolios of PFIs nationally. The Council has 12 remaining PFI projects which expire on a phased basis through to 2041. As these are long-term contracts and when they end, the responsibility for the continued operation and maintenance of the assets will hand back to the service user, which in this case is either the council or the schools and academy trusts. So just circling back to the original exam questions, the covering report outlines some of the key risks associated with PFI expiry. Namely, one risk being that the condition of the PFI asset on expiry does not meet the contractual requirements, is not fit for purpose, requires maintenance or replacement at the cost of the council. resulting in value leakage and reputational damage. There is also a risk that failure to adequately put in place arrangements for future service provision results in operational disruption, lack of continuity for service users, and reputational damage. There's a risk that may arise through failure to adequately resource, resulting in inadequate preparations for expiry. There's a risk associated with the costs for expiry, such as, for instance, surveys, which at this point are estimated. And finally, there may be a risk present from the failure to adequately implement effective governance controls, compromising control and decision-making functions. These are all risks which continue to be proactively managed and reported to an appropriate level of seniority within the Council, including an entry on the Strategy and Resources Risk Log. The covering report describes in detail the countermeasures that have been employed to mitigate these risks. Moving on then to the second query, which is around the lessons learned. With regards to lessons learned, these continue to be collated throughout the expiry process and used to refine both our approach and methodology. This refinement incorporates national guidance, industry best practice, engagement with central government and also the wider market. It is anticipated that this methodology will be embedded across our corporate portfolio of PFI projects. A lessons learned workshop was held with the PFI contractor following expiry of Cardinal Heenan to consider what went well and what could have been improved. A summary of that output can be found at Appendix 5 of the report. The key findings include that stakeholders would benefit from greater clarification concerning roles and responsibilities. In terms of a remedy, we are working with the PFI Centre for Excellence at NISTA, which is the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, from central government to develop a risk allocation matrix and terms of reference to address this, which will also benefit other national PFIs. A further lesson is that the clarification is required concerning the implementation of the expiry strategy corporately across our wider PFI portfolio, both in terms of resourcing and decision making. In terms of a remedy for this, it is proposed that a report be presented to corporate leadership team later this year with options on how this may be addressed. Finally, in summary, the Council is well placed to deliver expiry of the PFI portfolio. We are considered a best practice example within local authority for PFI contract management and expiry. However, going forward, we need to carefully consider resourcing to ensure that this continues. I trust this has been a useful overview. Welcome any questions.
Right, members, Councillor Hartbrook.
Thank you for that. I've got two questions on this. The first pertaining to page, I think it was page 68, which is on the legal of the 68 of the agenda pack, that is, of the agenda, where it says the remaining PFI contracts follow standard forms providing consistent framework for terms and conditions aiming to create balanced. The details relating to handback with earlier contracts are typically light in detail. So obviously the expectations of what would be handed back may be lacking in some of these contracts. I'm just wondering to what extent can that be balanced up in the lead up to the termination of those contracts or the handback of those contracts by rigorously enforcing obligations that are better defined, i.e. such as maintenance and ongoing activities, and how that is. The second question is, and it's not, is obviously, I mean, there was a lot of, I say, PFI contracts have been done by successive governments, and there's been a lot of discussion in media and I'm sure in council around the pros and cons of PFI. Of the PFI contracts that we are bringing back into our control, is there expected to be a saving or an on-cost? Because obviously, you know, you've got the cost of the PFI itself, and I think most PFI contracts also come with a maintenance element. But assuming that we are sinking, we're spending differently because we take over full responsibility. Is that expected to come with an on-cost or a saving? So if you could just address those two, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the first question around standard forms and the fact that each of the PFI contracts tend to have a slightly different approach on handback, and how that can be addressed and made sure that those sort of handback provisions are improved. And there's a few things that we are doing, and there's a few things we can do, and I think there's a few things that we're just not going to be able to achieve. So what we are doing, as Mike mentioned, is working closely with central government, NISTA in particular, the PFI Centre of Excellence, and also the departments under which each of the PFI contracts work. So to date, mainly DFE. And working with them has been really helpful in that they've helped us devise what standards should be if they're not actually set out in the contract already. So using various market standards on condition assets and the like. Obviously having those organisations involved gives us a little bit of extra clout and a little bit of extra reinforcement that this is how it should be, even if it's not being set out perfectly within the contract. So that's one of the main ways that we are dealing with it. But we're also going to engage with our PFI partners as early as we can to discuss any discrepancies, any areas where things haven't been covered, and see if we can negotiate and discuss and come to a happy agreement between the partners as to what it should look like. So that will address any deficiencies in the contract itself. But on top of that, we're going to spend a lot of time over the next few years until the next handback, which is 2030, making sure that we go back and thoroughly assess life cycle maintenance that's been done to date to make, and if there is any deficiencies there, work on the operational side of things. It's one of our mantras, expiry starts with operation. So we are redoubling our efforts in concentrating on the operational side of things, so that when it comes to expiry, we're not going to be tripped up by any failings that currently exist. Hopefully that answers your first question.
I've actually got a follow-up to that then.
Okay.
So you said that basically there is guidance around what should have been in the contracts but that isn't in the contracts. In my experience, that'd be very difficult to make contractually enforceable if it's not in the contract. It's not in the contract. I appreciate there may be some goodwill, but I would imagine the corporate entities that built these things and created these things will be looking to minimise their exposure to ongoing costs. So, and where my head went when I read this was, I would imagine that there will be contractual clauses of things that can be enforced or sanctions that can be imposed if the running of the contract is not done satisfactorily, i.e. if maintenance isn't done. So I guess where I was thinking is, if we can't if the handback, if by the time it gets to handback it's too late to do these, are there things that we can do that basically uses a mix of sort of probably mainly stick if they're not doing their basic or not doing what they should do, so that by the time the handover happens.
Yeah. So
I guess that 2 points then is, are we saying that we do think we can update the contract? Because I'd be surprised, but if you can, that'd be great. And B, it was more whether there are, in some of these contracts or all these contracts, strong contractual levers to enforce maintenance and other things that need to be done, so that by the time we get to the handover, we've...
Yeah, there are, and that's again the concentration on redoubling our efforts on the operational side of things, because PFI contracts, and please stop me when I start to bore you because I'm a PFI geek. There's a whole performance deduction regime that if they don't meet the KPIs during the life of the contract, they get money deducted off their monthly or quarterly payment. So yes, there is those things there. There's also your more general obligations around good industry practice, complying with legislation, which are more difficult to enforce, but they are still there, which then nicely feeds into NISTA and DFE and government guidance, because then we've got the hook of, well, that's government guidance that we do it this way, and you're obliged to comply with good and district practice legislation, etc. So there are things. It's not perfect, and it is going to rely on goodwill as well. And then there's a whole range of surveys that we'll do over the next few years to identify if all of that hasn't actually worked. That's the first question. The second question, the one that we were dreading about the pros and cons of PFI and whether there's any savings or on costs following expiry. I think it is a TBC. I mean, in terms of savings, at the moment, the way PFI is funded is that we do get central government funding through PFI credits. As soon as it expire, those credits stop. So we don't get that funding stream in anymore. However, it's anticipated that the costs of delivering the services will be less than they are under the PFI contract, because the PFI service charge also includes an amount for the original build costs, the funding costs, all of those kind of things. They will have been paid off. So you're left with just paying for the services, so for the maintenance, for schools, for catering, caretaking, cleaning, insurance. You're not now left with the payments that were originally for the original build. And also, when all said and done, despite the criticism that PFI does get, the services do tend to be very good and probably at a higher standard than otherwise delivered. So, ironically, there could be savings, but maybe the services won't be quite the sort of gold standard that you come to expect from PFI.
So if I was to sum up my understanding there, you're saying we're not looking at oh my God, there's a chasm of funding gap there, but you're also not saying, yeah, we're going to save a fortune. It's kind of like, it's quite finely balanced is what I'm hearing.
I think so. I mean, it's finance is not specifically mine or Mike's area, but yes, that's the assumption. I mean, there will be costs associated as set out in the report in terms of the expiry process, mainly around surveys, which will be a big cost to the council. But we've already been talking with Victoria and team to try and start estimating what that cost will be and putting it into the medium-term financial plan.
Is that it, Councillor Hartbrook? You're right, Councillor Carter.
Thank you. On the first two questions really are to Victoria, and I refer you to page 83, para 5.8, immediate and long-term need for more PFI expiry resource. In other words, we haven't got enough money to do what we need to do to protect the council's position. What plans are you making to make sure they get the extra resource? Because this is, I think, in my view, it's quite a very worrying situation. PFI is nothing more than hire purchase really, and now it's time to take back the asset. So could you answer that question? And secondly, financial close with a capital value of PFI schemes of £930 million in Leeds. What will we have paid back over those schemes' totality when we take them back? And the third question is to the PFI team. I think you're doing a remarkable job, and it's not going to be easy, as you pretty much spelt out. It's not going to be easy. I really worry that the asset we are taking back, the ones to the council, we won't be able to provide the service to the service users of those establishments that they currently enjoy. Now that is very, very concerning. So answers, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So just on the first two questions then, the first one about the extra resource. I'm working very closely with Joanne. Joanne reports into myself about the PFI expiry, what the team will be required in future years as these start to increase the number of PFI expiry we have, and we are building that into the MTFS. So we've started to increase the size of the team already, and we're one of the only local authorities that have got I think that's correct, isn't it, Joanna? Dedicated team on PFI already. We recognised this a couple of years ago. I remember me and Joanne having a discussion about what we'd require, and we built that in ready so that we were on the front foot with the team to be able to be at the forefront of what we need to do to make sure that these are done as smoothly as they can be.
Sorry, so we're making provision for that then, am I right?
We will.
Making provision for their increased costs?
Yes. Yeah. And we're also, on the amount we've paid back in totality on the assets that are transferring over, I haven't got that information to hand, so I'll have to get that and come back. Okay, thank you.
I think just to quickly add to the resourcing issue, I think, you know, there's obviously our team who sit within procurement and commercial services. We will deliver the expiry of the schools projects because they're within our remit anyway, and we will deliver the strategy for expiry, which is Mike's team. The directorates at the moment still need to consider resourcing for delivering expiry of their own. Obviously we'll be here to help, and we would deliver on their behalf if we were resourced up accordingly, but that's one of the decisions that still needs to be made going forward, and we've got time to make that decision as to where the practical delivery sits, whether it sits within my team or whether it sits within the directorate where the Project Excel sits. In terms of the assets coming back to the council and not being able to provide the services, maybe naively, I'm not as concerned. Schools projects, the delivery of the services will go back to will go to the schools, and obviously Leeds has a lot of schools that already deliver those kind of services themselves. So there's a lot of people to get some information from, including, you know, internal within the council. And part of our process is very much about advising the schools as to what they will need to deliver themselves once the contract's expired. We won't necessarily give the advice itself, but we've got a full stakeholder management plan that can signpost them to the right people to ask, including lots of services within the council, such as CEL, LBS, procurement, etc. The other projects, housing, again, we already house a lot of people outside of the PFI projects, so hopefully the synergies will be there. I guess the tricky ones are the non-accommodation ones, so street lighting and waste. Street lighting, I think they already have started thinking about how they'll deliver afterwards. Waste is probably the one that hasn't been thought about fully yet, but that is the latest one to expire, is 2041. And it's also the only project that has an extension option if needs be to help that transition. But as far as I understand, it's very, very technical and very interesting science behind it. So I'm not quite sure whether there's going to be lots of people out there that can deliver other than the incumbents.
Councillor Bithell.
Thank you. I just took a moment there to put in a job application for running the RUF. So in terms of, again, I've grouped them. I'm behaving today. So around schools, firstly, I know we've said we can't be sure what savings we're going to make, but will we be sticking to or expecting schools to stick to the same ridiculous costs for individual items that they've previously had to? So when I was teaching, it was things like if a kid broke a keyboard, instead of being able to get like a £5-6 quid keyboard that any other school would be able to get, they had to get the PFI £25 one or whatever. So is there going to be that element where we can have more flexibility in schools, which I think would be really valued by the schools in our wards? And then on the back of that, how are we helping schools to prep to be ready for those changes? Do we have, and I guess this will be a similar response to Councillor Carter's that you haven't here but might have elsewhere, do we have a list of what's been spent over the years on maintenance I think for me, that will be a really key thing to assure ourselves with, that they have been doing effective maintenance, especially as in the report it talks about not being able to get in to do intrusive surveys. And then finally, I'm not sure who's best to answer this. We know that when schools academise, it's like a double liability for us. So if they are in any deficit, the council has to absorb the deficit. And if they're in any surplus, I was going to say profit, but it's not profit, is it? But surplus, then they get to just keep it. How are we engaging with schools that are PFI to make sure we don't have a similar sort of double liability of, if they're not currently academies, we end up paying a load of stuff to help with that being handed across, and then an academy chain just comes in and basically takes the money and the asset without... I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense there. It made a lot of sense on my page.
Hi, made perfect sense. Thank you, Councillor. Just trying to pick up each of the points in turn. I think we'll do this. Yeah, we'll do this as a team. I think the first question was around the flexibility. Yes. Okay. Post expiry, there won't be any requirement for schools to buy anything through as they would through a PFI contract. So there will be greater sovereignty in terms of what the schools can and can't do. It's worth noting it's often reported, I think, in the media around the costs relating to expiry, but I think what is perhaps underreported is often that that often includes things like life cycle and maintenance, which is built into those costs as well. In terms of prime costs, yes, there will there'll be greater flexibility for schools, and this is something that we are supporting the schools with as part of the expiry process. My team is going and engaging with the next round of expiries to present to them or outline some of the options that might be available to them post expiry as to what they want to consider in terms of the way they operate for future service provision after the PFI contract expires. Hopefully that also addresses the second point, which is how do we help schools to make sure they're ready. There's also in terms of sort of helping them in terms of sort of budgeting and things. There is some information available externally which helps to inform that. It's a little bit apples and apples, because when you're trying to compare schools, it's obviously different pupil numbers, different sizes, etc. But there are certain benchmarks that are available. We are also working with FM contractors to get benchmarks around costs, etc. So hopefully all of this information helps schools to plan for a post-expiry provision. And then I think the third question was around engagement from a sort of from non-academies to academies, which did you want to pick up?
Yeah, I'm not sure we quite mentioned it. You also asked about the list of maintenance costs, whether we can get hold of those. We don't have them at the minute. If I'm being absolutely honest, getting the detailed maintenance information out of the incumbent providers can prove tricky. But again, that's something that NISTA and the market as a whole is working on, is about transparency of data and transfer of information. So we're hopefully going to see better results with that. In terms of the academies question, I don't think there's a good answer to that. I think if a school has been a maintained PFI school, it comes to the end of expiry, everything's been sorted out, it's in a really good condition. If it applies to become an academy, or if it's pushed down the route of becoming an academy, the academy process will happen as it does with every other school, such that the asset will transfer over to the academy trust. We do have it's either 10 or 11, I can't recall exactly. We do have 10 or 11 out of the 28 PFI schools which are already academies, and which in itself will present an extra set of stakeholders that we need to liaise with. But at the end of a project, that school will well, it already has transferred to the ownership of the academy anyhow. So the academy process won't be impacted by a school coming out of a PFI project, as far as I am aware.
Just to come back on a couple of those. So those that are already academies, I figured the academy would have to do any final checks. We wouldn't have to do the checks.
No.
Or we're just going to have to just give them more money, the academies?
We will have to comply with our contractual obligations, and our contractual obligations are to carry out the surveys. There is a second layer of contracts between the council and the academies. It's called a school agreement, and that sets out our obligations. And as lead under the PFI project agreement, we still work on behalf of the academies.
That is devastating news. Can we also, just as another, come back on the costs of keyboards? I only use keyboards because it did my head in every day when I was teaching. No, you can't have a letter M because it costs £4. I guess it would be useful for us potentially to have a look with our children and families education colleagues around what the increased value will be of teaching and learning, of being able to do things like sticking stuff on the wall and the impact that can have on better pedagogy, and making sure that we include that when we're talking about the value of these PFIs moving into the future. Because certainly it might be less now. I came out of the classroom 5 years ago, but at the time it was really, it definitely impacted the way that we taught, because we couldn't have certain specific things because it didn't meet the PFI contract.
No, I appreciate that, and it is something that we are very aware that we're going to need to do, is sort of like your benefits realisation assessment on our PFI contracts. At the moment, we're not 100% sure how to go about that, and we are again engaging with the marketers to see what other people have done. We've also got maybe an opportunity to work with some academics to maybe work out how to best do benefits realisation, particularly in the schools arena, because it's not just about the money, is it? It's about the educational achievement. It's the learn, thrive, and grow within the schools. We did do a piece last summer. In our service, we host a few graduates from Leeds Beckett, and they did an initial piece of work on starting to look at benefits realisation, and there is potentially evidence out there that working in or learning within a better environment does increase educational attainment, but there's so many other factors that influence it. I think it's going to be quite a difficult task to try and differentiate what's due to the building as opposed to what's due to the locality, the teachers, etc. But hopefully, if we can engage with the right people to help us with that research, hopefully we will be able to get at least an indication.
As long as they're quick and they're quick answers, that'll be fine. Thank you.
Okay. Paragraph 5.9. It talks about responsibility not being decided on yet. It feels not okay that we don't know who the responsibility is going to sit with. So my request would be that that's sorted relatively swiftly. And then a comment on being pleased to see that we're benefiting from leading the way. And can we sell any of these skills that we've got from being in the forefront to other councils to help them with their PFIs and offset some of our costs?
In terms of the responsibility, I think is that, as I was referring to before, about whether it sits with directorates or with a central team. If that's the case, then that is something that we will be addressing in the CLT report, which is summer.
Spring,
summer.
Late spring,
So that is one of our next to-do lists. But that will require engagement of the directors as well as ourselves, because we can advise, but we won't be making the decisions ourselves. So what was the other one? I was supposed to give a quick answer. The second question.
Getting money for you lot's skills.
Getting money for you. From the market. Yes. So it is something that we'd like to do. We do think it's something we can do, as in we've got the knowledge and experience. However, at the moment it would be dependent on resources, because we can't direct resources away from delivering our own projects to others. But it is something that we've got in the back of our mind, and we've got a few ideas, but they're not going to come to fruition for a little while yet, until we get our own house in order.
Right, I'm not going to let Councillor Carter back in because he's itchy. Right, so I'm going to draw a line under that. I'd just like to make a few comments with regard to...
Can we ensure they come back regularly with reports on this, though, Chair?
Councillor Carter, you haven't let me finish yet. You're preempting me. Don't like being preempted. First thing is, we've got a report on risk management coming up, and there's a lot of risk around this. There's the reputational risk to the council's financial risk and so on. There's also a concern from me around the capacity of the different departments you've mentioned being able to do some of the work along with their day job. You've got organisations within the council like Leeds Building Services who are already struggling with the capacity of what they've got to do within the council. So it would be quite nice to know going forward that we have got the in-house skills to actually move this at a pace that's needed. And as I've already been prompted to say, although we've got elections coming up in May, and none of us are sure whether we'll be on this committee or even if we'll be here next time we meet, but I think it would be quite good to have regular updates, and they don't have to be long updates of issues that are and when they arise, so we're kept abreast and we can keep an eye on those risks. That's really good, and thank you for that. So just to finally to finish, can we just make note of the recommendations in the report and agree those? That's great, thank you. And we shall now move on to Tim, who's going to tell us all about corporate risk.
Thank you very much. This report presents the committee with an update on the corporate risk work that we've been doing over the past several months. The work is split into two main aspects. The first is risk assurance, which is how do we know the risks are being reviewed and managed properly. And the second part is risk appetite, which is articulating what appetite do we have for taking risk across our corporate risks. And this report is like a complementary report to the annual report that we do for this committee, usually every November, and also a progress update that we provided back in November on this work. So in terms of the risk assurance work, members may recall that we undertook an exercise to look at every single one of our corporate risks across something called the 3 lines of defence. The first line is the operational work that takes place within directorates and services. The second line is corporate oversight, which is this committee being a good example of corporate oversight, as well as executive board, the internal audit function and corporate risk management. And then the third line of defence is external oversight, so things like inspections and external audits, and how do the risks pan out across those 3 lines of defence. And in a short meeting that follows this one, I'll be presenting a table that looks at all our corporate risks and RAG rates them across the 3 lines of defence, breaking it down into individual elements. So in terms of the results of that work, we know that the risks are reviewed and reported every single quarter to the respective directorate management team, and then on to corporate leadership team. And then executive board members are provided with a copy of the corporate risk register, as well as an annual report that goes to executive board every summer. So a lot of really good reporting takes place there. And I attend every single directorate management team meeting where that routine report is talked about, and there's a healthy discussion on those risks. We know that external assurance is obtained where possible. So some risks lend themselves to getting that external assurance more than others. So things like Ofsted, Care Quality Commission, Information Commissioner's Office, and colleagues from external audit. That provides a good deal of assurance, but not all of our corporate risks lend themselves as well to external assurance as others do. And that's just sort of generally the nature of those risks. We know from the review that there were some areas where we found amber ratings in the assurances. There were no red showstoppers, but there were some areas where we know that people are working on things, but they're not quite in place yet. So, for example, some policies and procedures are being updated and it's just taking longer than expected. So that to me was an amber rather than a red, because if there was no policy and procedure in place for some of the risks, that would be a big alarm bell ringer. We know that when risks are reviewed and updated, sometimes people tend to focus on providing progress comments for those risks rather than actually thoroughly going through the risk and updating some of the supporting details. So when we do our independent sweep of those risks every so often, occasionally we pick out details that are out of date and need updating. So as a result of that, we're relaunching our one-page how to review and sign off your risk document, and in the next period that will be heavily promoted across risk key contacts and directorates. One area where we also found something that we could do better is, although we go to every single directorate management team regularly with risk, we don't always go to service leadership teams, the ones that are lower down, particularly where you've got some of those cross-cutting risks like finance, IDS, HR. So, for example, we go to HR, pester them every single reporting period, but we don't go as regularly to IDS and finance, and so that's something that I'm rectifying in the next reporting period. So, from a risk assurance point of view, generally very good, but some areas where we could improve on. It's important to note that this isn't something that we can draw a line under and move on, because the risk environment is very dynamic and rapidly moving. And just like your car MOT certificate, it might be okay one day, but the next time it might not be. And so we need to keep this sort of dynamic and up to date, but at the same time maintaining proportionality and not overloading people with bureaucracy. So it's important that we strike the right balance. We know that this piece of work will inform the internal audit coverage, and so if it's out of date, then that could compromise what we're looking at. So there'll be a two-way sharing of information with audit colleagues, and Jonathan and Angela have got access to the documents, the risk assurance documents. So when they come to review an area that relates to a corporate risk, they can access those documents and see what the assurance level is, you know, where the amber ratings might have been. But also when they've finished that audit, they can then provide feedback to me and update the document so that we're keeping this live and up to date. It's also worth pointing out that new risks are coming on board all the time. And when we went to corporate management, corporate leadership team 2 weeks ago, there were 4 new risks that needed adding to the register. And so we're now going to have to risk assure those to make sure that we've got that same level of information as we do all the other corporate risks. So I think we set a ball rolling here that isn't going to stop anytime soon, but it's good because it clearly will form part of our corporate risk management policy and strategy, which is going to be updated in the next municipal year. A couple of extra bits that are quite relevant to this as well. Our corporate risks, they're linked to key performance indicators, and we've mapped out across which risks link to which indicators. We know that we're undergoing a review of our performance arrangements and framework, and so key to that will be making sure that risk is considered. Is there anything more that we can do to link the risks and the performance indicators? Similar to that, obviously we have a council plan, and there are those 4 work streams linked to the key areas of the council plan. And what we want to do with the risks are pick out whether there are any gaps in those different work streams, what could possibly go wrong, in other words. And we know that although the risks are linked to the Leeds ambitions and the areas of the council plan, making sure that it's kept current and dynamic and up to date is really important, because all our risks stem from the council plan and the Leeds ambitions. Quickly moving on to risk appetite. Again, I've got a chart that I will present in the meeting that follows this one that articulates the appetite stances for each of our corporate risks. For the benefit of members who might not be aware, appetite is the amount of risk that we're willing to take. Some of our risks we need to be quite averse around because the consequences, if anything goes wrong, are quite significant. So things like health and safety, safeguarding, we tend to be more on the risk averse side. But with things like the boosting the city economy, we need to take risks in order to achieve things. So that's why we have some of the really big events that we have in the city, including the Tour de France Femmes depart next year. So if you're going to be a bit more risk open or risk eager, as we call it, that's perfectly fine, provided you've got really good controls in place to manage that stance. This has proved a particularly challenging piece of work because it's new to many people, it's a new concept. And although we've had some really great risk appetite statements, notably for things like cyber, workforce, the budget and information management, a lot of other people have struggled with producing their statements because it's a new concept to them. And even though there was some really good guidance that came out last autumn, sometimes people have struggled to get down on paper what the risk appetite, the sort of in-depth details are. So in order to progress that, what I've identified is they need a lot more support. And so over the next few months, I'll be going out and meeting with people and actually sitting with them and working them through the risk appetite statements. But it's important to make the distinction that we want to do this with people and not to them. And also as a risk management function, we need to be quite independent because we facilitate the risk details. We aren't the risk owners ourselves. So we need to sort of strike that balance between helping and doing. So with the areas where we need to finish the detailed risk appetite statements, what we've agreed with corporate leadership team is that we'll do a rolling programme where we'll focus in on 2 or 3 of those statements each reporting period, work with the key contacts, get the statements up to date, bring them to corporate leadership team where they can do a mini peer review, and that will keep people on their toes to getting things done. And then ultimately with the risk appetite, it's about feeding it into decision making. So if a report goes to executive board, we need to be asking ourselves, is that decision within our risk appetite? And you can only do that if you've got a really good risk appetite statement that can be easily understood. So there's an awful lot there, and this is, like I say, a piece of work that will be ongoing. So I will pause now and happy to take some questions in advance of that specific meeting we've got following this one.
Well, I think I'd rather wait and get the questions actually at the meeting, if that's okay with everybody else. And thank you for the comprehensive report. It's really good to know you recognise it's an ongoing piece of work and things are moving ahead. So I think I've just got to say, does the committee agree with the recommendations set out in the report on this? Brilliant. Next item.
Thank you, Chair. I think, conscious of time, I've been thinking, what can I chop out of this to help us move along the agenda? I'm going to take this as read in terms of presentation of the audit plan for next year and our methodology for that, and move straight to questions.
Right, members, any questions? Councillor Bithell.
I have a lot of questions. I wonder if it's worth us just organising to meet outside of here based on the time. Because none of them are particularly pertinent to the public or anything. There's no aha moments coming.
No, I think this is such an important committee. If we can actually converse some way about the programme, it would be actually quite good because it develops all the time and we're responsive to things that happen through the year as well. So that's quite good. And maybe it's something we could all get involved in, perhaps a Teams meeting or something to follow this up. Thank you. Right, so we're moving on very quickly to 13, review and update on Leeds City Council's local code of corporate governance.
Thank you. I am conscious of time, so I won't go through this very much other than to say it's an update of the local code of corporate governance in light of the addendum that was issued in 2025. Appendix 1 sets out the revised code, and Appendix 2 is a track changes version of the previous code, so members can see what the difference between the two is, and I'll take any questions if anybody's got any.
You can ask questions, not moving on so quickly, you can't. Right, that's really good. So again, committee agree with the recommendations as set out in the report. Excellent. And it's you again, Angela, agenda item 14. Councillor Biffle, sorry.
Just very quickly on that one, just to put on record how helpful it is to have the track changes version. We don't always get a track changes version, but it was absolutely on point to have it. And Chair, just for you, on agenda item 12, we didn't do the recommendations, and then Debbie will yell at you.
Do you all agree with the recommendations? Thank you very much. Right, so I'm lost now. Agenda item 14.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 14 is the proposed work programme for the Committee for the Municipal Year 26-27, as well as the Member Development Plan for the year. Taking on board the request, we will look at how we add the PFI updates to the work programme, and it's just if there are any other things that people would like.
Councillor Bithell.
I'm really sorry, everyone. It turns out I love corporate governance. The one that kind of stuck out to me from a load of the different papers was the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian has such a role to play within so many of the different things that come to us. I wonder if it's worth having a specific session with her on not maybe how she provides assistance to the auditing and governance processes of the council.
Angela, do you want to come back?
We can certainly look at that. We do work very closely with the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian through the counter fraud work, and the counter fraud colleagues have regular meetings with her. But I'm sure we can look at putting in a separate session with her.
I think it's just a matter sometimes of where they fit within the reports we get already, and perhaps enhancing those reports where, because I mean I've got a few around planning enforcement as a specific item, as opposed to being the condition surveys, where we actually are with the condition surveys on all our buildings, after being told at a previous meeting that in some buildings they haven't had a condition survey done for a decade or more. So there's lots of items, but it's where it fits within the reports we get already. And so if we can look at that and see if there's any definite items we need to pull out, or whether we can actually make sure we just enhance the reports we get to include these, that'd be really good. Anybody else on the programme? No?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the audit plan for July, so at the moment our preference is to bring it to June 1, but I'll liaise with the the relevant people to make that happen.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. So, item 14. Any more questions from members? Excellent. So, again, the dreaded, does the committee agree with the recommendations in the reports so Debbie can include that? That's excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much all for attending today. I think it would be very remiss of me before we go. We had a lovely event here yesterday to remember Councillor Francemeer. It's the last one of our season, and I'd just like everybody to know, especially if a family watching, how much we miss her. And going forward, I don't know if I'll be chair next year. Hopefully we'll find somebody much better who can keep time. So thank you for coming. Everybody have a wonderful period while we're in Purda, and we can't annoy you all the time with calls and questions. And we'll see you all at the next meeting, hopefully. Thank you very much. Yes.